in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I am the Senior Partnerships Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I am super excited to welcome our next guest onto the interview series, Sheri Crosby Wheeler. She's the Vice President of Global Diversity and Inclusion for Fossil Group, Inc. Sheri, it's so nice to see you. If you want to share a little bit about yourself, including your pronouns, and when you were younger, do you remember how exactly you answered the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Well, thank you, Christina, for having me. Again, as she said, I'm Sheri Crosby Wheeler. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am currently serving as the Vice President of Global Diversity and Inclusion at Fossil Group, which is, yes, for those who know, they know. For those who don't, we are a global design company that makes watches, handbags, accessories, super cool things. So, and I have been here for approximately a year and a half working at Fossil. And as far as the question, what did I want to be when I grew up? I'm trying to think, I don't even know if anybody, maybe they asked me, but since I'm an old lady, I do not recall. I remember what I thought I wanted to be. I wanted to be a teacher. And so I didn't go down that path, but in doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work, I do oftentimes get a chance to teach people. So I get to be a teacher sometimes.
I love it. There is a common through line in there as well. I know that when we're talking to folks in diversity, equity, and inclusion, there's a lot of conversations around the role that it plays at organizations, and there's so many goals that one can have as well. And I want to start off kind of big picture and asking, what role do you see private employers playing in creating more equity in the world, knowing that we just had a webinar around diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace as well. And we know that this work is not going to erase or eradicate racism, sexism, any of the isms as well, but that's not an excuse not to lean into this work too.
Yeah. So that's a really great question because companies are sometimes think, well, we don't do we have to dive into societal issues? And, that's really not our thing. And what I will say is the time for that has passed. Like the times for companies sitting on the sideline it's gone. And they have to be focused on things relating to diversity, equity, and inclusion, not only in their organization, but also outside their organization. I know that the Edelman Trust Barometer, I think that report comes out every year, and they talk about who do people trust? What institutions do people trust? And companies and businesses, believe it or not, come in much higher than governments, which you would think governments making laws, but people trust their organizations that they work for or companies that produce products and goods. So that means that companies and employers have an outsized, if you will, effect on things that happen in society because people trust them and trust what they say and trust their voices. So I think employers have a tremendous opportunity to really affect change, not only in their organization, but also in the world.
Absolutely. I definitely agree with you because there's a huge platform. You reach so many folks internally, externally with your employer brand, with the brand in general. I would love to know, I know for the past, 6+ years, you've been working exclusively on diversity and inclusion strategies and integrating those in your really kind of corporate setting as well. Can you tell me a little bit about Fossil's diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy from key pillars or goals, North Stars of what you're focused on?
Yeah, so we have 5 pillars of our strategy. Some organizations have 3, we have 5. That was on purpose because I really wanted us to be able to focus in on these particular 5. So the first one, and the one that I think is so very important, is knowledge. Knowledge is the basis for all that we do. Knowledge about diversity, equity, and inclusion principles, knowledge about each other, our experiences. So I think that one is a huge one. So that's the first one. The second one is diversity. It's not some fancy name or cutesy name. It's just diversity because we know that has to do with representation. But then also there's inclusion, and that's obviously that's something that needs to be focused on separate from diversity. Then we also have accountability / transparency, because that's the way that you kind of move forward. If you hold yourself accountable, society holds you accountable. And so that's how you can move forward. So that has to be a part of what you're doing. And then we also have an external pillar that, again, going back to how do we affect change in our communities where we work and where we live, for our employees and customers. And so there's also an external pillar as well. And so those are the areas that we really focus on. And I've only been here a year and a half. I feel like we've gotten going pretty good. Sometimes, this work can take a while, but I don't want people, you hear people say it's a journey. And I was reading an article today and it was saying, saying it's a journey allows people to think, well, we'll never get there. Oh, it's a journey. So what? Oh, no, most journeys, races, or whatever, they do have an endpoint. And so I would love to get to a place where we are, the most diverse, the most equitable, the most inclusive company and society that we can be.
Absolutely. It sounds like those 5 pillars are really holistic and thinking about the internal, the external, and just the impacts that you can have as well. And I know you mentioned kind of change. We know that change doesn't happen in a couple weeks or a couple months. And this work takes a lot of intention, and you can get there to the endpoint as you were talking about with this kind of the work as well. What is a strategy that you are most proud of that you would want to share with folks listening, and why? What was the end result?
Proudest. I don't do great with superlatives because I'm always like, oh, I don't know which one to pick. So when people ask me favorite, but I will pick one. When I got here, we didn't have employee resource groups yet. And I know a lot of organizations have employee resource groups, and some of them have been for years, since the 70s. We know that's the case. And then they'll create, additional ones as time goes on and needs of employees change. So we came in and we're like, all right, this is what we're going to do. We didn't start with just one. And, because we're thinking, let's just go, let's get it going. So we started right out the gate with 6. Just, we're launching 6. Some people might say that's crazy, or, how can you do that? But if you put the right processes and procedures in place, and you take the energy and the enthusiasm of employees, it can work. So I was really proud that we got those off the ground, that we stood those up, and now they're going, and we're seeing what these employees can bring to the organization through the employee resource groups. People are like, oh, because there's so much when you unleash the talent of employees and you allow them to kind of lead from the front, then you see what they can do.
Absolutely. As a former employee resource group leader myself, I definitely see the value in just the community, and also just launching 6 and making sure that you're collaborating and giving voice to employees is so important. I think over the last couple of years, business as usual had to be out the window, and folks are consistently auditing the full employee experience at different touch points. Along those same lines, around examples, can you tell me about how you've redesigned a system to be more equitable over the past 2 years, whether it's a process, policy, initiative, or program?
Well, I wanted to add a little bit to my last question too. Another thing that I'm really proud of with respect to getting those employee resource groups started. So in a lot of companies, it is really valuable employee work, time, discretionary effort that employees give who are leaders. So, like you said, that they give to the employee resource groups. And I recognize that, during all this time that I've been working on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I wanted to recognize that even more. So the focus that I've given now, we're not, super huge, tons of cash, but it's not necessarily about that. It's about the recognition of the value of the work that these employees are putting in. So in addition to, we want to do something monetarily for these employee resource group leaders for giving of their time and their thought leadership, I also said, how can we make it easier for them? How can we make it easier for them to share ideas and thoughts with the organization? So at a lot of companies, the employee resource group members, they're the ones who they come up with the ideas and they have to execute. They have to do all the things. If you want to go volunteer with a nonprofit, you got to call the nonprofit, set up the day, get the transportation, whatever the case may be, t-shirts, food, whatever it is. We said, give us that. My team was like, we'll take all of that off of you. All we want is your thought leadership. We want to know what it is you want to do, and then we will execute. And so to me, and it's a lot of work. And my team, we see how much work it is. And I'm like, can you imagine? This is something that employees have to do on top of their job. And I said, let's pull it all off of their plate, as much of it as we can. Now, if they say, we like to do this piece, we say, okay, that's fine. But you don't have to do any of it. Give it to us. We just want to know what you want to do. So I'm extremely proud of that. Model. Maybe it's a model for the future. I don't know, but it takes some of that burden off of the employees who have raised their hand and volunteered of their time and given their discretionary effort, because they don't have to. That's voluntary. So
Absolutely. Resourcing folks, meeting people where they are, making sure you're actively listening and providing that support too, setting people up for success is so important. And it sounds like working with ERG leaders and the community as well is really important too. And it does take time and effort. So celebrating them and also offering that time investing in their development is really important. We know that a lot of folks are looking for, as you were talking about earlier, for their employers to have a special place in their lives now. One study showed that 47% of employees reported that their stress was just higher than anything they'd experienced in their entire careers, and only 37% agreed that their organization really understood what they needed both in their personal lives and for their families. How are you and Fossil really showing up for the full lives of employees?
this is what I'll say on that. Because we know everybody has been through just craziness for the last several years.
Yep.
And I think what we're encouraging leaders to do, and what I try to do, is just really keep a pulse on my team that I work with, what's going on with them, paying attention, and not just listening with my ears, listening with my eyes, all my senses, to see, is this employee, do they seem like something's going on? Not forcing anybody to share anything with me, but just paying attention. And hey, do you need a half a day? Or someone comes in and says, hey, my baby is sick. Can I leave? And I don't want somebody to feel guilty about that. I'm like, we all go through different seasons and in our lives. And so just being responsive to those seasons, knowing that if you trust your employees, they're going to get things done. But you have to have that flexibility. And I wanted to go back to your one question, because I didn't answer it, about designing spaces to be more equitable and having those policies and procedures and practice. One of the things that I was really proud of that we had happen here, and the reason why, so if you can't tell, I'm all about employees, I'm for the people. So one of the things that we had change, and it seems simple, but it's big, is that we had a dress code change. And this didn't come from just us auditing. This came from us listening. This came from an employee trusting enough to come to myself and say, hey, I see this thing. Here's how it can be more equitable. Can we do something about it? And I said, hey, let's get a group together. Let's talk about it. Let's see if we can change it. But it was only because that employee, now I'm not saying we wouldn't have gotten to it later on down the line, but that employee felt enough trust, felt enough comfort to come forward and say, this thing needs to be changed. Here's why it's not equitable. And we're like, you know what? You're right. Let's look at it. And sure enough, we did change it because that employee felt comfortable enough to come forward. So I wanted to share that as well.
Yeah, and I think that is really a really good example of how folks feel comfortable giving you that feedback too, and really setting up a space to feel like, I want to change this. I have kind of faith that the organization is also going to listen, and leaders are going to see my perspective on that as well. We know that it's not Sheree's responsibility or your team's responsibility to make sure an entire company is equitable, and you are fostering inclusion at a company too. We talked about teaching and guidance, providing the space and resources. How do you continue to empower folks across the company, no matter what department they're in, what manager level they're in, to really practice equity-driven leadership, so they're thinking about in their interview processes, working on the products, how you're thinking about that too?
I think that all comes back to just providing people with the knowledge and the tools so that they can think in terms of, because like you said, my team, we can't be everywhere, not in a company of thousands of people. So people have to get into that mode themselves when they're thinking about products, when they're thinking about marketing, when they have to be thinking that way for themselves. And what I like to do to empower people is provide them with that knowledge, but then when they get it right, like cheer for them and recognize it, like, wow, good for you. You got this thing right. I know we recently rolled out a mentoring program. And the very first person who said, yes, I'll be a mentor, I'm like, absolutely, you're first. Good job. You know what I'm saying? And you would think, like, do grown-ups need gold stars? I like gold stars.
We
I
do.
like recognition, and so just kind of that positive reinforcement and helping them to know, yes, you're on the right track. Yes, you're doing the right thing. Keep it up, keep learning, keep trying, keep growing. So I think that's the way that you empower people and let them know. And then what I also try to do too is let people know when I mess up, like, hey, you're gonna mess up, you're gonna mess up, I mess up. So I let people know when I don't know it and when I mess up too. So they'll know, okay, I don't have to be perfect. I can mess up. She's not gonna jump all on my head. It'll be okay. And just to keep pushing forward.
Yeah, leading by example, leading with humility, not trying to cover up mistakes, really saying everybody makes mistakes and this is, these are mine, making sure that people feel comfortable sharing, effectively communicating. Right. You mentioned gold stars. I also love gold stars. Understanding when something is working, when it's not, you're doing a good job, and having a conversation with team members, celebrating that amongst the team is exciting. I think a lot of folks, when we are on this show or doing webinars, they're like, how do we know we are doing a good job? What is your philosophy around measuring diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives and strategies, knowing that, we're not looking to check a box and say, okay, we accomplished this in 2022. We don't need to work on this in 2023. It's a continuous, when you know better, you do better, as Maya Angelou says.
My thing is, I know that there's metrics that organizations put together and, businesses, they like cold hard numbers. I understand that. And yes, we look at some numbers, but to me, the greatest measure of success in any DEI program, initiative, strategy is when the people, whether it's customers externally and communities, or if it's employees internally, give you that qualitative feedback, that feedback that says, this changed my perspective in this way. This changed my life in this way. I appreciate that you did this. I appreciate that you see me, you hear me, you value me. When you get that qualitative feedback, that's kind of what keeps me going more than like a percentage increase here or that type of like hearing from people, because then you are really making an impact in someone's life for them to take the time to write this message or stop you and tap you, because numbers by themselves, they don't tell the story. They don't give you that full context of how you are impacting someone's life. So that's kind of the measurement that I take. But gold standard, going back to gold, measurement is the feedback that you get from employees or customers or people in the community.
Yeah, that feedback is so important. The qualitative and understanding the story behind the numbers as well, how people are feeling. In doing this work for a long time, are there any buzzwords or phrases you're just tired of hearing in these conversations?
Ooh, I loved this question. I was like, finally, somebody asked me this question without me having to just throw it out there unsolicited. This one right here. And I know people use it and they're going to keep using it, and I understand. But when people are like, we want you to bring your whole self to work.
Ooh, +1. I love that. Yeah.
Like, here's my thing. I understand that's what people want to hear. I never say that because I'm like, is that realistic? Your whole self?
Absolutely
Like
not.
all of you? So I heard a practitioner say a couple of years back, bring your best self to work. Now I'll take that, because on any given day that might look different. That might be different. You're doing your best. You're bringing the best you have based on what external influences are impacting you and all of that. But your whole self, your authentic, your whole authentic self. And I'm just like, that's saying a lot. And that's something you have to earn. That trust is undergirding that. And you have to earn that from all employees. And then they have to give it to you a little bit by little bit, not just, we want you to bring your whole self. Well, wait a minute now. What, why should I do that? You know what I'm saying? No, I'm not saying there's not employees who don't do that. There are, but everybody doesn't feel comfortable to do that. And yes, we can work towards it. And I still think everybody won't feel comfortable, but I bet people can get on board with, bringing their best selves on any given day, giving your best. Everybody, wants to do their best. So bringing your best self. So that's my big one right there. I'm just like, for real. As soon as I hear that, yeah.
Absolutely. I love that answer because you do hear a lot of folks saying, we want you to bring your whole self to work. And someone the other day was like, I don't want you to bring your X self to work, whether that is, as much as you would like to share and show. And it goes two ways as well in terms of trust. And if I bring my best self to work, trusting that you're going to accept that best self as well. And it's a give and take. Sheree, is there anything that I didn't ask throughout our conversation that you would like to share, or underscoring any key insights you hope listeners bring with them after hearing our conversation?
I like to tell employees and organizations that even though diversity, equity, and inclusion might not be in your job title, it's everybody's job. And I know people have heard that before, but I just need to reiterate that seriously. It's not something over there that the D&I team does or HR does. It's not over there, and you can kind of, when they call you to it, you're like, okay, I'll do something because they asked me, and now I'm done. No, all of us, I always say, I want everybody to get to the point where they're all thinking the same way. Well, wait a minute. Do we take all of the different, ideas into account? Well, what about this? Y'all, is that inclusive enough? I feel like we're leaving out so and so, or hey, like everybody thinking that way, not just the DEI people. But I think people have to get past the fact that, like, oh no, that's their job. No, that's our job, all of us. So I'm out here trying to just build up a whole bunch of DEI practitioners. Everybody just is thinking along those lines, and thinking in that fashion. So that's the last thing I would say, is that you too can be a diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioner.
You too. I love it. I think that is a great note to end on. It's everybody's responsibility. And I think there's always an opportunity where we could do better, asking yourself questions like, who are we leaving out of the conversation? Who is this centered around as well? And making sure we're really being intentional and authentic, and thinking about the role we have and the power we have, positionality in the organization and just in life in general. Sheree, thank you so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture this afternoon.
Thank you, Christina, for having me, and for AllVoices inviting me. I appreciate it. And this has been fun.
Of course, of course. And as a reminder for folks who are listening, at AllVoices, we really believe in both employees and employers being seen, heard, and understood, and know it's a requirement for the business to really succeed overall. Have a great rest of your afternoon, everyone.